James Mercer stood by the window of his office on the 10th floor, looking out at the city below. At 52, he had come a long way from helping his parents at their roadside eatery. Now he owned Mercer's Family Diner, a chain with 15 restaurants spread across 3 states. The business had grown beyond anything his parents could have imagined when they first opened their small diner 40 years ago. He turned away from the window and walked back to his desk, picking up the quarterly report his assistant had left there. The numbers didn't look good. Customer satisfaction was down by nearly 15% compared to the same time last year. Even worse, staff turnover was up by 22%. People were quitting faster than they could hire replacements. This doesn't make sense, James muttered to himself. He had always tried to create a workplace where people felt valued. The company handbook talked about family values and treating each other with respect, but something was clearly wrong. He pressed the intercom button on his phone. "Linda, could you ask Raj from HR to come up to my office?" 20 minutes later, Raj knocked on his door. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Raj had been with the company for nearly 8 years and James trusted him completely. "Yes, come in. Close the door behind you." James waved at the chair across from his desk. "Take a look at these numbers." Raj studied the report, his brow furrowing. "I've been noticing some concerning patterns in the exit interviews. People aren't giving us the full story." "What do you mean?" "They say things like personal reasons or found a better opportunity. But there's something in how they say it." Raj looked up. "I think they're afraid to tell us the real reasons." James leaned back in his chair. "Afraid? In my company? I've tried different approaches, but they clam up. Something's happening at the store level that we're not seeing from up here." James tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. Last night, he'd watched a show where the owner of a hotel chain had gone undercover in his own hotels. The problems he'd discovered had shocked him, and they were things no employee would ever have reported to the CEO. "What if," James began, slowly, "what if I worked in one of our diners for a couple of weeks, not as the owner but as a regular employee?" Raj's eyes widened. "You mean, go undercover?" "Exactly. I want to see what's really happening. No filters, no managers putting on a show because the boss is visiting." "Which position would you take?" James thought for a moment. "Dishwasher. Nobody pays attention to the dishwasher, but they can see and hear everything." Over the next week, they put together a plan. James would work at the flagship diner downtown, the busiest location and the one with the highest turnover. They created a new identity. Mike Jenkins, a 52-year-old who had lost his job when the factory where he'd worked for 20 years closed down. "We need to change how you look," Raj said, studying James's face. "Everyone in the company has seen your picture." James rubbed his clean-shaven chin. "I could grow a beard." "That'll take too long. We need something faster." They settled on a fake mustache and glasses. James also bought clothes from a thrift store, worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and an old jacket with patches on the elbows. Nothing like the tailored suits he usually wore. Standing in front of the mirror in Raj's office, James barely recognized himself. His normally neatly combed hair was messy and slightly greasy. The mustache changed the shape of his face, and the glasses, thick black frames with clear lenses, hid his distinctive eyes. "Now for the final touch," Raj said, handing him a bottle. "This will temporarily darken your hair. It'll wash out in a few weeks." After applying the hair dye, James looked at himself again. The distinguished CEO with salt and pepper hair had disappeared, replaced by a tired-looking man who seemed weighed down by life. "Perfect," Raj said. "Your own mother wouldn't recognize you." Next, they worked on James's speech and mannerisms. As CEO, he stood straight, spoke confidently, and used business terminology without thinking. Mike would need to be different, slightly stooped from years of physical labor, hesitant when speaking, and unfamiliar with restaurant jargon. James also practiced speaking with a slight accent, just enough to make him sound like he might have grown up somewhere else. He rehearsed his backstory until he could tell it naturally, how he'd worked at the factory until it closed, how he'd been struggling to find steady work since then, how he was living with his sister while he got back on his feet. Remember, Raj warned him, you can't let anyone know who you really are, not even a hint. If employees find out the CEO is spying on them, it could make everything worse. I understand, James said, but I need to know what's really happening in my restaurants. These people work for me. If something's wrong, I need to fix it. The day before he was due to start, James met with his executive team. He told them he would be away for 2 weeks on a personal retreat. His assistant would forward any urgent matters to him, but otherwise, they were to handle things without him. Take some time to recharge, his COO said, patting him on the back. You've been working too hard lately. If only they knew, James thought as he left the meeting. The hard work was just beginning. That night he stood in his apartment looking at the small duffel bag he'd packed. For the next 2 weeks he would be living in a modest hotel room near the diner, nothing like his spacious condo with its views of the park. He wouldn't be driving his luxury car but taking the bus like many of his employees did. James felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. It had been 30 years since he'd worked a job like this. Back then, he had been washing dishes in his parents' diner to earn pocket money while going to college. Now he was about to do it again, but with much more at stake. As he turned out the lights and prepared for bed, he wondered what he would discover. Would he find small problems that could be easily fixed? Or would he uncover something more serious that had been hidden from him all this time? Either way, he was determined to find out the truth about what was happening in the business his parents had started and that he had built into a regional success. If things had gone wrong, he would make them right, no matter what it took. James arrived at the diner for his first day as Mike just before 6 a.m. The sky was still dark as he pushed open the back door marked, "Employees Only." His heart pounded with a mixture of nervousness and determination. "You must be the new dishwasher," said a middle-aged woman sorting through delivery receipts. "I'm Betsy, the morning shift supervisor. Let me show you where to put your stuff." She led him to a tiny break room with mismatched chairs and a table covered in coffee stains. His locker was just a rusty hook on the wall. "Clock in at that machine over there, then head to the kitchen. Luis will show you what to do." Luis turned out to be a heavyset man in his 30s with forearms covered in small burn scars, badges of honor from years in restaurant kitchens. "First time washing dishes in a restaurant?" Luis asked, looking at James's hands, which were still soft from years of office work. James nodded, sticking to his story. "I worked in a factory before, making car parts." "Well, this ain't rocket science, but it's harder than people think. By tonight, you'll feel it in your back, your feet, your hands, pretty much everywhere." Luis wasn't exaggerating. The dishwashing station was tucked into the hottest, steamiest corner of the kitchen. Within an hour, James was sweating through his shirt. The commercial dishwasher roared like a jet engine, pumping out scalding hot steam with each cycle. Plates, glasses, and silverware piled up faster than he could process them during the breakfast rush. "Keep it moving," shouted the head cook whenever James slowed down. "We're running out of clean plates out front." By lunchtime, James's lower back was screaming from constantly bending to load the dishwasher. His fingers were wrinkled and raw from the hot water and harsh chemicals. When he asked where the rubber gloves were, Luis laughed. "We ran out 2 weeks ago. The supply order keeps getting cut back. Here, use these." He handed James a pair of torn gloves with holes in 3 fingers. Better than nothing, I guess. During his 15-minute break, the only one he'd get in his 10-hour shift, James collapsed onto a chair in the break room. 2 waitresses came in, too busy talking to notice him in the corner. "I can't keep doing this," said the younger one, who looked barely out of high school. "I had my schedule all set up around my classes, and now Mr. Thomas changed everything without even asking." "That's how it goes here," said the older waitress with a sigh. "I had to drop out of my nursing program last year because they kept changing my hours. Couldn't make it to classes. But I told them when I was hired that I needed certain days off for school. Honey, they tell you what you want to hear to get you in the door. Then it's business needs this, and we're short-staffed that." James listened, feeling a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't how his family's business was supposed to operate. When his break ended, his muscles protested as he stood up. He hadn't done physical labor like this in decades. By the end of the day, his hands were chapped and bleeding at the knuckles from the chemical sanitizer. Despite being exhausted, he took careful notes of everything he'd seen and heard when he got back to his hotel room. The second day was even worse than the first. The dishwasher machine broke down mid-shift, and James had to wash everything by hand for 3 hours while waiting for someone to come fix it. "Can't we call a repair service?" he asked Luis. "Budget cuts," Luis replied with a shrug. "We have to wait for the company's maintenance guy, and he covers all 15 restaurants. Sometimes takes days for him to show up." During those 3 hours of hand-washing dishes, James fell hopelessly behind. The waiting staff kept bringing in more dirty dishes, adding to the mountain of work. One server, an older man named Hank, actually helped him for a few minutes when things slowed down in the dining room. "Thanks," James said gratefully. "Don't mention it," Hank replied. "Been there myself. Started as a dishwasher 30 years ago." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, this place isn't what it used to be. The old man who started it, he cared about people. His son runs it now, but we never see him. Just suits from corporate who care about the bottom line." James felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Is that what his employees thought of him? On the third day, James witnessed something that made his blood boil. The regional manager, Thomas, showed up for a surprise inspection. Thomas was in his 40s, always dressed in a perfectly pressed suit, with slicked back hair and a permanent look of disdain on his face. "The dishes aren't being properly sanitized," Thomas announced loudly, holding up a glass to the light. "Who's responsible for this?" All eyes turned to James. I've been doing it like Luis showed me," James stammered, playing his part. Thomas marched over and thrust the glass in James's face. "See these water spots? This is unacceptable. This is how we lose customers, and losing customers is how people lose jobs. Do you understand me?" James nodded, gritting his teeth to keep from revealing who he really was. Later during his break, he overheard Thomas talking to the kitchen manager. "Cut the supply budget by another 15% this quarter," Thomas was saying. "Corporate wants better. Numbers and supplies are an easy target." "But we're already short on everything from gloves to cleaner," the kitchen manager protested. "Figure it out," Thomas snapped. "That's what you're paid for." On his fourth day, James witnessed something that shook him to his core. A young waitress named Penny made a small mistake on an order, giving a customer fries instead of onion rings. Thomas happened to be in the diner and saw the customer complain. He followed Penny into the kitchen and cornered her by the prep station. "What's wrong with you?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Can't you get a simple order right? Do you know how much mistakes like that cost this company?" Penny's eyes welled with tears. "I'm sorry, it was busy and I don't want excuses." Thomas's voice rose. "One more screw-up and you can find another job. There are plenty of people who would be grateful for this position." Penny nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. No one in the kitchen said a word, or even looked up from their stations. James wanted to step in, but knew he couldn't blow his cover yet. Later, in the break room, he sat with Luis and another cook named Daryl. "That was rough, what happened to Penny," James said carefully. Daryl snorted. That was nothing. You should see Thomas when he's really angry." "Why doesn't anybody say anything?" James asked. Luis and Daryl exchanged looks. "Look, new guy," Luis said. "Let me give you some advice. Keep your head down and don't make waves. People who complain end up with their hours cut until they quit. But isn't there somewhere to report things like that? To corporate or something?" Daryl laughed bitterly. "Corporate doesn't care about us. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet to them. The owner's probably sitting on a beach somewhere counting his money while we're all working ourselves to the bone just to make rent." James stared into his coffee cup, his appetite gone. Was this really what his company had become? As James began his second week posing as dishwasher Mike, something unexpected happened. He started to feel like part of the team. The kitchen staff had accepted him, no longer seeing him as just the new guy. They shared jokes during slow periods and looked out for him when things got busy. Despite his sore muscles and chapped hands, James found himself looking forward to seeing these people each day. "You're getting faster," Luis commented one morning as they prepped the kitchen before opening. Took me 3 weeks to get that good. James felt a small surge of pride. Thanks. Still hurts like crazy at the end of the day, though. Try this, Louise said, handing him a small tube of cream. My wife makes it with herbs from her garden. Works better than the expensive stuff from the store. James applied some to his raw hands, feeling instant relief. This is amazing. She makes extra for kitchen workers. We all need it. Louise hesitated, then added quietly, Look, you seem like a decent guy. If you're planning to stick around here, you should know how things really work. Over the next hour, as they worked side by side, Louise filled James in on the unwritten rules of survival at the diner. How certain managers expected favors like covering shifts without being clocked in. How complaints mysteriously led to reduced hours. How equipment issues were ignored until something actually broke down or hurt someone. It wasn't always like this, Louise said. I've been here 8 years. It used to be different. What changed? James asked, his stomach nodding. New management about 3 years ago. That's when Thomas came in. Everything became about cutting costs, no matter what. Later that day, James met Elena, a waitress who had worked at the diner for 5 years. She was in her 30s with tired eyes but a warm smile for customers. During a brief lull, she came back to the kitchen to grab a coffee. How's it going? New guy? She asked James. Getting the hang of it, he replied. You've been here a while, right? Elena nodded. 5 years next month. You must like it here then? A shadow crossed her face. My son has special needs. The medical insurance is what keeps me here. I can't risk losing it even though... She trailed off. Even though what? She glanced around to make sure no managers were nearby. I haven't had a real raise in 3 years. I do twice the work I used to, hosting, serving, training new people, for basically the same money. Every time I ask about the raise I was promised, there's a new excuse. James thought about the quarterly profit reports his financial team had proudly presented, showing increased margins. Was this how they were achieving those numbers? By breaking promises to people like Elena. His thoughts were interrupted by a crash and a cry of pain from the grill area. Daryl, one of the cooks, had burned his arm on an exposed pipe near the stove. That pipe's been leaking steam for weeks, Louise muttered as he rushed to help. We've reported it 3 times. The kitchen manager handed Daryl some ice wrapped in a towel. You'll be fine. Get back on the line. We've got orders piling up. Shouldn't he see a doctor? James asked, shocked. The manager gave him a cold look. If he wants to fill out an incident report and lose the rest of his shift, that's his choice. Daryl, cradling his arm, shook his head. I can't afford to lose the hours. He went back to the grill, wincing in pain. That night after closing, James stayed late to help with deep cleaning. He found himself working alongside Hank, the older server who had helped him days earlier. Been meaning to ask, Hank said as they scrubbed grease from the walls. What brought you here? Most people don't choose dishwashing if they have other options. James stuck to his cover story. Factory where I worked closed down, bills don't stop coming, so here I am. Hank nodded sympathetically. Been there. Started washing dishes when I was 16 after my dad got sick. That was 30 years ago. He stretched his back with a grimace. Never meant to stay in restaurants this long. 30 years, James echoed. You must have seen a lot of changes. That's for sure. Hank's voice took on a nostalgic tone. The old owner used to work alongside us sometimes. Busy night, he'd roll up his sleeves and jump on the line or even wash dishes. His son took over, the current owner, but we never see him. Don't think he's set foot in this location for at least 2 years. James felt his face grow hot with shame. It was true. He made annual visits to each location, but they were always scheduled in advance. The places were cleaned spotless before he arrived, and he mainly spoke with managers, not line staff. What's he like, the owner? James asked carefully. Hank shrugged. Couldn't tell you. Only seen him in company newsletters. Nice suit, nice smile. Probably has no idea what's really happening in his restaurants. The next day, James noticed a customer complaining about food that came out wrong. Hank handled it beautifully, apologizing and quickly bringing a replacement. But when he returned to the kitchen, Thomas was waiting, having seen the interaction on the cameras. "That's the third mistake from the kitchen today," Thomas snapped. "That comes out of our profits. The customer was fine with—" Hank started. "I don't care what the customer was fine with," Thomas interrupted. "Kitchen errors cost money, and money is what keeps this place open and you employed. Someone's got to be accountable." Thomas stormed into the kitchen and pointed at one of the newer cooks, a college-age kid named David. "You're cut for the day, clock out." "But I've only worked 3 hours," David protested. "And that order wasn't even mine." "Clock out, now." Thomas's voice was ice cold. "Or don't bother coming in tomorrow." David looked around helplessly, but everyone avoided his eyes, focused intently on their stations. Finally, he untied his apron and tossed it onto the counter before walking out. James's hands shook with anger as he scrubbed furiously at a pot. This wasn't just bad management, it was cruel and possibly illegal. That evening, Elena rushed into the break room, her face pale. "My son's school just called. He's sick and needs to be picked up." She approached Thomas, who was checking inventory in the office. James couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see it through the office window. Thomas was shaking his head. Elena's pleading gestures grew more desperate. Finally, she walked out of the office, tears streaming down her face. "He won't let me leave," she whispered to Hank. "Says we're too short-staffed, and I'll get a formal write-up if I go." "Go," Hank said firmly. "Your kid needs you. We'll cover your section." "I can't lose this job, Hank. The medical insurance, we'll figure it out, go." Elena grabbed her purse and hurried out the back door. James watched as Hank and 2 other servers quietly redistributed her tables among themselves, covering for her absence. In that moment, seeing how the staff took care of each other despite everything, James made a decision. Something had to change, and soon. He couldn't let this continue in the business his parents had built with love, and that bore his family name. James woke up on Thursday morning with a sense of dread. He had only 3 days left in his undercover role, and each day was revealing worse problems than the one before. As Mike, he'd begun to feel protective of his coworkers, people who worked hard despite being treated poorly by the very company he owned. When he arrived at the diner, there was commotion in the kitchen. A delivery truck had just dropped off the weekly produce order, and the kitchen manager was arguing with Luis about the quality. "Look at these tomatoes," Luis said, holding up a box where half the contents were clearly overripe, some already molding. "And the lettuce is wilted. We can't serve this." The kitchen manager, Pete, looked pained. "The new vendor is cheaper. Thomas says we have to make it work." "By serving rotten food?" Luis shot back. "Just cut around the bad parts," Pete said, lowering his voice. "We can't afford to send it back. Thomas will have my head if we go over budget again." James watched as Luis reluctantly took the produce, muttering under his breath in Spanish. In the prep area, James could see the cooks carefully cutting away the moldy parts of vegetables and salvaging what they could. His stomach turned at the thought of his restaurant serving food prepared this way. "This is wrong," he said quietly, to Luis. Luis gave him a weary look. "You think I don't know that? I've been cooking for 15 years. I used to be proud of the food we made here. Now?" He shook his head. "Now I wouldn't feed some of this to my dog." Around noon, the main dishwasher broke down with a loud clank and a puff of steam. James called Pete over, who fiddled with it for a few minutes before sighing heavily. "I'll call maintenance, but don't hold your breath. You'll have to wash by hand until it's fixed." "How long will that take?" James asked, looking at the lunch rush dishes already piling up. Pete shrugged. "Days, maybe. The repair budget was cut this quarter. Even when Gary comes out, he might not have the parts." James spent the next 4 hours with his hands in scalding water, trying to keep up with the endless stream of dishes. By mid-afternoon, his fingers were wrinkled and raw, reopening the cuts that had barely begun to heal. During a brief pause in the rush, he stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. Behind the diner, he found Elena sitting on a milk crate, her eyes red from crying. "Everything okay?" he asked, though it clearly wasn't. She wiped her eyes quickly. Fine. Just tired. James sat on another crate beside her. Over the past week, they'd become friendly during shared breaks. Is it your son? He asked gently. Elena hesitated, then nodded. The school called again. His asthma is acting up, but I can't leave. Thomas already gave me a formal warning for yesterday. She took a shaky breath. My sister's picking him up, but he was crying for me. He's only 7. James felt rage building inside him. No parent should have to choose between their child and keeping their job. That's not right, he said. There must be something. There isn't. Elena cut him off. I've worked here 5 years, Mike. 5 years of picking up extra shifts, covering for people, doing whatever they asked. And the one time I need them to be flexible. Her voice broke. When they went back inside, disaster struck. The backup sink where James had been washing dishes was overflowing, water spilling across the kitchen floor. In the chaos, Hank slipped and fell hard, dishes shattering around him. My wrist, he groaned, cradling his arm. I think it's broken. Pete helped him up, looking panicked. We need to fill out an incident report and get you to urgent care. No incident report, came a sharp voice from the doorway. Thomas had arrived during the commotion. We don't need corporate breathing down our necks about safety issues again. But his wrist, Pete began, could just be sprained. Thomas interrupted. Hank, take the rest of the day off. Put some ice on it. If it still hurts tomorrow, see a doctor on your own time. I need a doctor now, Hank insisted, his face pale with pain. And workers' comp should cover it. I got hurt on the job. Thomas's face hardened. File a workers' comp claim and I'll have to include that you were warned multiple times about proper footwear. Your shoes don't have the required non-slip tread. That would be your 3rd safety violation this year. It was a lie. James had never seen Hank being warned about his shoes, but the threat was clear. Thomas was saying Hank could lose his job if he filed for workers' compensation. Hank's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, I'll go to the clinic myself. As Hank left, still holding his injured wrist, Thomas turned to James. Get this mess cleaned up, now. James bit his tongue and grabbed a mop. His hands shook with anger as he cleaned the floor, thinking of ways he would make this right once his cover was blown. Later that afternoon, a produce delivery arrived from another restaurant in the chain. James overheard Thomas on the phone. Yeah. Take everything they can spare from Store 7 and bring it here. I've got corporate visitors coming tomorrow and I need this place looking perfect. He paused, listening. I don't care if it leaves them short. They can cut corners for a day. My bonus depends on this inspection. When Thomas hung up, James resumed mopping, trying to appear busy and uninterested. But inside, his mind was racing. Thomas was taking supplies from another location, leaving them potentially short-handed, just to make this restaurant look good for a corporate visit. How many other managers were doing the same? Was this why some locations consistently outperformed others in the reports James reviewed each month in his real role as CEO? At the end of the day, James was emptying trash in the back alley when he overheard Thomas talking with Pete near the delivery entrance. The labor costs are still too high this month, Thomas was saying. We're already running with bare minimum staff, Pete replied. People are working doubles just to cover the schedule. Then we need to get rid of the expensive ones. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed Pete something on the screen. Look at the hourly rates. Anyone who's been here more than 3 years is costing us too much. Start finding reasons to write them up. You want me to fire our most experienced people? Pete sounded shocked. Not fire, Thomas corrected with a cold smile. Just make their lives difficult enough that they quit on their own. No severance that way. Pete hesitated. Some of these people have families, Thomas. Elena's got a sick kid. Luis has 3 children. Not our problem, Thomas said dismissively. It's just business. Corporate wants better margins and labor is our biggest expense. I'm not sure I can do that, Pete said quietly. Thomas's voice hardened. Then I'll find a kitchen manager who can. Your choice, Pete. James had heard enough. He slipped back inside, his decision made. Tomorrow would be his last day as Mike the Dishwasher. On Monday, he would return as James Mercer, CEO, and heads would roll, starting with Thomas. James arrived at the diner early Monday morning, but not through the back employee entrance. This time he walked through the front door wearing a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, mustache gone, and glasses replaced with his regular contacts. The hostess's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Mercer, we weren't expecting you today," she stammered. "That's the idea," James said with a tight smile. "Please continue as normal. I'm just observing." He sat at a booth with a clear view of the dining room and kitchen entrance. The breakfast rush was in full swing, with servers hurrying between tables and the familiar clatter of dishes from the kitchen. He spotted Elena taking an order from an elderly couple, smiling despite the dark circles under her eyes. Pete, the kitchen manager, emerged from the back and froze when he saw James. He quickly ducked back into the kitchen and James could hear urgent whispering. Word of his presence spread quickly among the staff, creating a ripple of nervous energy. At precisely 8:30 a.m., Thomas walked in, checking his phone. He didn't notice James until one of the servers nervously nodded in his direction. Thomas's head snapped up, his practiced smile appearing instantly as he approached. "Mr. Mercer, what a pleasant surprise. If I'd known you were coming, I would have—" "Prepared?" James interrupted. "Made sure everything looked perfect for my visit?" "That's exactly why I didn't call ahead." Thomas's smile faltered. "Of course. Well, let me show you around. We've made some excellent progress on cost control this quarter." "I'm sure you have," James said coldly. "But first I need everyone's attention." He stood up and raised his voice. "Could I have all staff members, front and back of house, gather in the dining room, please? We're closing for 30 minutes. Thomas looked panicked. "Sir, we have customers. The customers will get their food first, and then receive vouchers for free meals on their next visit. This can't wait." As the last customers received their food and left with their vouchers, the staff gathered nervously in the dining area. James could see confusion on their faces. He spotted Luis near the back, Hank with his wrist in a brace, and Elena looking anxious. None of them recognized him yet without his disguise. "Thank you all for gathering," James began. "Most of you don't know me. I'm James Mercer, the owner of this restaurant and the entire Mercer's Family Diner chain." He paused, then removed his suit jacket. "But for the past 2 weeks, you've known me as Mike Jenkins, the new dishwasher." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Elena put her hand over her mouth. Luis muttered something in Spanish. Thomas's face drained of all color. "I worked alongside you, ate with you in the break room, and experienced firsthand how this restaurant, my restaurant, really operates." James rolled up his sleeves, revealing hands still raw and chapped from the harsh chemicals and hot water. "What I discovered was deeply troubling. Food safety violations, broken equipment left unrepaired, scheduling abuses, intimidation, employees forced to choose between their families and their jobs." Thomas stepped forward. "Sir, I can explain. I heard you tell Pete to find reasons to write up our most experienced employees so they would quit." James cut him off. "I saw you threaten Hank to prevent him from filing a legitimate workers' comp claim. I watched you deny Elena time off to care for her sick child." James turned to address the staff directly. "I owe all of you an apology. This isn't the company my parents founded, and it's not the company I thought I was running. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of what matters most, the people who make this business possible every day." He faced Thomas again. "You're fired, effective immediately. Please leave your keys and company phone at the hostess stand on your way out." Thomas's shock turned to anger. "You can't—" "I just did," James stated firmly. "And you should know that I'll be reviewing every disciplinary action, schedule change, and denial of time off that you've implemented. Any employee who was wrongfully terminated under your management will be offered their job back with back pay." As Thomas stormed out, James addressed the silent group again. "I know many of you are wondering what happens next. First, this location will be closed for the remainder of the day, with all of you receiving full pay. while I meet with each of you individually to hear your concerns and suggestions." He turned to Pete. "Call the repair service and get the dishwasher fixed today regardless of cost. Then call our original produce vendor and place a quality order to replace everything in the cooler." Pete nodded, looking relieved. "Starting tomorrow," James continued, "we're implementing emergency changes across all 15 locations. Guaranteed breaks, fixed schedules posted 2 weeks in advance, functioning equipment, and absolutely no retaliation against anyone who reports problems." Over the next hours, James sat at a booth with a notepad, meeting with employees one by one. Elena cried when he personally apologized for how she'd been treated and promised flexible scheduling to accommodate her son's medical needs. "I never thought the owner would care about someone like me," she said, wiping her eyes. "Every person in this company matters," James replied. "I lost sight of that, hiding behind quarterly reports and scheduled visits. Never again." Luis brought up the quality issues in the kitchen. "We used to be proud of the food we made here. We can be again." "You will be," James promised. "Quality ingredients, proper equipment, and staff who aren't rushed or stressed make better food. It's that simple."